A very good afternoon to all the viewers. Today's topic of discussion is retrospect history of India from 1857 to 1950. In the earlier lectures, we have discussed the various aspects of this particular period, and when we try to recollect the important events which were associated with this period, we would like to talk about the revolt of 1857, the socio-religious reform movements, the starting of the national movement in India with the emergence of the Congress in 1885, and the various phases of the Congress from moderates to extremists to revolutionaries to the Gandhian phase, and how all these phases they contributed to the freedom of India. So in that perspective, this period is very, very important, that it not only provides us the history of all these events, but at the same time it also gave us an opportunity to get free ourselves from the colonial rule, and how colonial rule, because of its apathy, because of its exploitation, because of its nature of superiority towards the natives, and how they tried to exploit India in every way, was detrimental to the interests of the Indian. So when we talk about the socio-religious reform movements initially in this particular period, we find that in the initial part of the 19th century, when the socio-religious reform movements they were started, both social and religious, they are interlinked because of the fact, because in India the social reforms were also related to religion as well. They are intertwined and intertwined in this way, and the socio-religious reformers, they also realized that unless they will bring about change in the religion, they cannot bring change in the society as well. So at the same time, when they were talking about both these aspects, they were also talking in the terms as India was under the colonial rule. So how the socio-religious reform movements, they got also associated with the issue of cultural regeneration, that how Britishers, their attitude towards the Indians, where they considered them inferior and considered themselves as superior. So how their attitudes towards the Indians, how the kind of policies, they also reflected the attitudes of the Britishers. So in this way, when we will try to understand the socio-religious reform movements, we will find that they are linked to the two issues, and these two issues are basically with regard to the dining or marriage, because both these issues, that intercaste marriages and inter-caste dining, they were not being taking place, and if both these things they take place in society, then all the barriers with regard to the caste, they will also get away. It was also related to the issue of national consciousness, because the cultural ideological struggle which was represented by the socio-religious reform movements was an integral part of the evolving national consciousness, because movement brought initial intellectual and cultural break which made a new vision of future possible. It was part of resistance against the colonial cultural and ideological hegemony. So when we see and try to assess the socio-religious reform movement, we see that the colonial structure or the colonial and ideology was also linked to the colonial hegemony, and when they were trying to see the Indians in a different light, when they were trying to project Indians in the sense that they were inferior in every way, their customs, their traditions, they were inferior to the British, then Indians, they felt that they should also bring about certain changes in their own traditions and culture. So this was an important period. Apart from this, when we come to the other important event specifically, was the issue or was the event of 1857, and the 1857 revolt was very, very important in the context, because it was the first attempt to break free from the shackles of the colonial rule, and there were various causes for the revolt of 1857, be it the political causes in the framework of the doctrine of lapse, that how Lord Dalhousie he introduced the doctrine of lapse, because of which a number of Indian states they were being taken away by the British. On the other hand, when we try to see it in the framework of economic causes, we see the triumvirate of Sarkar, Sahukar and Zamindar, and how all the three, they were trying to exploit the Indians, and the various revenue settlements, they also tried to exploit the Indians. Other kind of causes, be it the religious or military, In the military sense, the issue of greased cartridges, that how the cartridges which were being used which were to be used by the soldiers, they had to be bitten off, and it was being circulated, or it was being the new cartridges had some kind of a filling in which cow as well as pig fat that was being used. So when a soldier will use that cartridge, he had to peel the cartridge, and he had to peel it with his mouth. So in that way the issue of religion was also associated, because it will defile the religion of both Hindus as well as the Muslims, and both of them, both these communities, they raised against the British for this kind of an adventure which was undertaken by the British. When we try to assess the movement in the framework of the nature, we will find that it was initially referred to as a sepoys mutiny, and it was suggested by the British that it was not a national movement, or it was not a war for independence, as it was suggested by some of the nationalist thinkers like V.D. Savarkar, who said that it was the first war of independence to become free. And on the other hand, some of the other scholars, they have tried to see revolt as some sort of a conspiracy, that it was a conspiracy, it had a very limited kind of impact. So various historians have tried to see the revolt in different ways, but when we try to assess the importance of the revolt of 1857, we will see that revolt provided some kind of an inspiration to the later generations, and these later generations got inspired by the revolt, in that sense that when the emergence of Congress takes place in 1885, before that also we have a number of associations which were being formed in different parts of the country, and how Indians, they were trying to organize themselves against the colonial rule. Though it might be in the incipient stage, they were the initial stages, but such kind of measures, they had started appearing. So when we try to locate the importance of the Indian National Congress, the moderate phase from 1885 to 1907, what we see is that moderates, they had a politics in which they were talking about petition, prayer and protest. And when they were talking about petition, prayer and protest, they had this kind of feeling that Britishers, they were the just rulers, and the public opinion in Britain was not properly organized, and the Britishers, they were such kind of people that they will not want that Indians, they are being targeted or they are being exploited by their own men or their own people in India. So they tried to create some kind of a feeling or a public opinion in Britain itself, and for which they undertook a number of measures as well. And the kind of demands which they raised, be it in terms of Indianization of the Indian services, Indian civil services, or some of the measures which with regard to the people, those who went to Fiji, Mauritius, etc., as indentured labor. So they were not restricting themselves to the issues which were there in India, but rather they were also thinking in the context of the people, those who were going out of India as well. So from that perspective, these people, those who were educated, those who were indulging in some kind of part-time politics as suggested by Sumit Sarkar, and how the extremists, those who came after the moderates, they criticized them as armed chair intellectuals and mendicants. So what we see in the initial phase of the moderate phase, we find that their brand of politics was considered to be some sort of a politics of the mendicancy by the extremist. But on the other hand, when we try to assess the situation, India was under the colonial rule, and Indians did not have any kind of luxury in that sense that whatever they will do, they will get away with it. Rather, the British, the kind of policies which were being followed by the British, they were very stringent and strict. So Britishers will not allow any such kind of a movement which was going against them. So initially the support which was given by a civil servant called A.O. Hume was taken by the leaders of the Congress, initial leaders of the Congress, and A.O. Hume also served the Congress as the secretary of the Congress for a period of nearly 22 years. So what we see is that the initial period of the Congress was also very successful in that sense that it was trying to, it was able to create some kind of feeling among those people. And the next phase in this period before the coming of the extremist leaders was the movement which became very popular, that was the Swadeshi movement. Swadeshi movement arose because of the fact that Bengal was divided into two provinces, East Bengal as well as the West Bengal. In West Bengal we find more more Hindus, and in Eastern Bengal we will find more Muslims or a majority of Muslims. So in this way the intention of the government was to, in a way, divide the movement in that, divide Bengal in such a way that the national movement or the kind of unity which was being displayed in that particular area should be threatened, or it should be some kind of obstacles they should be brought about in the unity which was being displayed. And they felt that if they will divide Bengal in this way on communal lines, then they will be able to break the unity of that particular province. And the kind of movement which was generated because of the partition of Bengal in 1905, it was referred to as the Swadeshi movement, where a large number of masses, they joined the movement, and they harped on using Swadeshi goods, and they suggested that if they will use more and more Swadeshi goods, then they will be able to not only create some kind of problems for the imported goods which were coming from Britain, but at the same time they also talked about boycotting the foreign products, for which huge bonfires of cloth and foreign products they were being undertaken. And they, at the same time, they boycotted the law courts, schools, colleges of the Britishers. Another important aspect which was associated with the Swadeshi movement was the issue of Atma Shakti or self-sacrifice, that if people are ready to sacrifice themselves for the cause, then they will be able to achieve their end, so, or their objective. So this was one of the important aspects where you find that Raksha Bandhan or Rakhi Bandhan was also being undertaken during the Swadeshi movement, how magic lanterns they were being used, jatras and notankis they were being also organized in Bengal, especially jatras they were being organized, in which people they were made aware about the issues of the Swadeshi movement. So all such kind of issues they were associated with the Swadeshi movement. Then we come across the phase of the extremists, Lal, Bal and Pal, as you can see on the screen as well. They were the critics of the moderates, and they criticized the mendicancy of the moderates as well, but they harped on the excessive glorification of the ancient heritage, and they also deified nation. They considered nation to be as some sort of a mother, so which alienated Muslims. So these were some of the limitations of the extremist kind of politics which was being followed by the extremist leaders. But on the whole, if we try to assess the situation, we will also realize that the emergence of the extremist in the Indian politics was also because of the fact that they realized that moderates were not all that successful, and they were not able to get their demands realized by the colonial masters. So in that way they felt, for example, Bal Gangadhar Tilak says that Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it, because whatever they were demanding as a right, and they did not want that moderates they should beg from the Britishers to provide any kind of concessions or rights for the Indians. So such was the kind of politics which was being followed by them. Later we also see that the kind of politics which was being followed by the extremists, it also did not bear any kind of fruit, because larger mass mobilization, as we find in the case of Gandhi, could not be seen in the politics or the policies which were being followed by the extremist leaders, and because of which we find that there was a phase of the revolutionaries. And these revolutionaries believed in the cult of individual heroism. They were disillusioned with the British government, and they used violence to achieve their objectives. And for that they attacked the government officials and treasuries. And Gadar movement was one movement which was started in San Francisco in America, And this movement was also related to the Indian conditions as well, because the people, those who had started this movement in America, they realized that unless India will become free, then till then they will not be able to achieve any kind of status for themselves in America. So they realized that to become independent, they had to support India. And people, or the revolutionaries, not only from America but those who were staying in other parts of the world as well, be it South Asia, Southeast Asia, they asked them to help the Indians in every way, not only in terms of providing money but also in terms of arms and ammunition, and also in terms of people going to India as well. So all sorts of help was to be given to the Indians as the Ghadarites asked from its members. But at the same time, revolutionaries, generally there is a tendency to see them as terrorists, because some of the Cambridge scholars or some of the Indian scholars also have used this term terrorism. But the connotation of the term terrorism has changed in recent times, and these people, they were terrorizing the British officials. So this kind of application of the word terrorism was suitable for the British historians or the Cambridge historians, and these historians were writing history with all kinds of prejudices against the Indians. So this term which has been used is totally a misnomer, and it should not have been used at the initial sense. But we can also locate this term in the sense that it was used by the Cambridge historians, and this term was not at all applicable when we try to see the revolutionaries, because they were fighting for the independence of India and they were trying to strike some kind of a threat to the British. So in this way, this term has been debated recently as well. Then we come to the next phase, which was the phase of the Gandhian politics, and the ideology and the politics of Gandhi was being seen in this particular period. Satya and Ahimsa were the tools of Gandhi, and how he suggested that the means and ends, they should also be kept in mind always. If we want to achieve good ends, good means should also be employed. He also believed that the belief and practice should be same. If we are preaching something and we are not practicing that thing, then we are not justifying our ideological position. So this is what particularly Gandhi felt. He used various techniques to achieve independence. For example, Satyagraha was one, then fast. So all these kind of things, they were being used by Gandhi so that India could achieve its independence. And at the same time, initially when we try to see Gandhi came to India in 1915 from South Africa. He was already some sort of a celebrity in India, because he was well known for his work which he did in South Africa. So when he came, he tried to assess the Indian situation and moved around different places of India in local compartment of a train. And then he realized that now he was ready to pursue his brand of politics. And the initial movements of Gandhi, be it Champaran Satyagraha or Ahmedabad Mill Strike or Kheda Satyagraha, all these three initial experiments of Gandhi, they became successful, because in all these three experiments in which Gandhi used the techniques of Satyagraha, Gandhi used the technique of fast, he was able to bring this kind of consciousness to his opponents that he was doing something right and what they were doing was totally wrong, and they should relent in that sense and bring some kind of justice for whom Gandhi was fighting. So initially he was successful in his experiments, and thereafter when the Rowlatt Act was introduced in India, which was talking about preventive detention, no appeal, no vakil and no dalil, and Gandhi and others, they tried to organize themselves against the Rowlatt Act. And during that particular period, we also find that Khilafat movement has also started, and Khilafat movement, Khilafat committee met a number of times, and they decided to start a movement called the Khilafat movement. And Gandhi and Ali brothers, both of them, they came together, a number of meetings of the Khilafat committees, they were also being organized, where Gandhi was always a special invitee. And finally they decided that how the British, they dismembered the Turkish Empire, and because of the dismemberment of the Turkish Empire and the kind of apathy or disrespect showed to the Khalifa or Caliph of Baghdad, Gandhi and others, they decided that this movement should be started, and how Khilafat movement and the non-cooperation movement, they merged as well. In 1920, when this movement was initiated, this was also undertaken. Before that, we also find that the issue of Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where a large number of people, they were being massacred by the colonial rulers, and how these people, those who had assembled peacefully and were without armed, and how in a very barbaric manner they were being killed by the colonial rulers. It was also criticized at different places, and Gandhi felt that the Punjab wrongs which had taken place in the form of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, they should also be redressed. So these were some kind of concerns which were being found. Gandhi also initiated the important movements like non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, and Quit India movement. Non-cooperation movement was started in 1920, civil disobedience movement in 1930, and Quit India movement in 1942. Gandhi was also talking about the issues of emancipation of women. He was also talking about issues of Hindu-Muslim unity. He was also talking about the issue of Swaraj. He was also talking about the issue of village welfare and Charkha. So all these issues were very close to the heart of Gandhi, and Gandhi felt that through the constructive work which he was doing in the various villages of India, the Swaraj will usher in, and Khadi and Charkha became some sort of symbols, not only for the Gandhian brand of politics, but at the same time they became symbols for self-reliance and national unity as well. And when we talk about these movements, non-cooperation movement was in a way suspended because of the Chauri Chaura incident, in which a number of policemen, they were being burnt by a crowd, and Gandhi felt that violence was not justifiable in any kind of movement. Similarly, when we try to see the civil disobedience movement, you see a huge participation of women in the civil disobedience movement. And when Gandhi started it with the Dandi March, where he nearly walked around 379 kilometers from one place to another, he reached the Dandi beach, and from where Gandhi started this movement. And when Gandhi started this movement, then Gandhi also realized that salt was one thing which was to be utilized it was being utilized by every Indian, be it a rich or poor, elite or any kind of disadvantaged section of society. And kind of salt laws which were being imposed by the colonial rulers, they were not acceptable to the Indians. So Gandhi felt that he will be able to garner a lot of support because of this salt law. And on the other hand, Britishers, they felt that the kind of thing which Gandhi has initiated in terms of breaking the salt law was a very petty or a minor issue, and it will not be able to generate some kind of a support which Gandhi anticipated. And Gandhi finally proved to be more successful, because a number of protests in different parts of the country, they were also started when Gandhi started this Dandi March. Another important issue was the issue of communalism, and Bipin Chandra, he has tried to talk about this issue and explained this issue in three phases: that the followers of the same religion have common socio-economic, political and cultural interests. That is what he talks about in the first stage. In the second stage, he says that socio-economic, political, cultural interest or the secular interests of followers of one religion are divergent from followers of other religion. That was the second stage. And thirdly, these interests are antagonistic to each other. This is what he argues that happens in the third stage. So these were the three stages of which Bipin Chandra talks about, and the kind of developments which were taking place, be it in form of the emergence of the Muslim League, the emergence of the Hindu Mahasabha, the emergence of a politics where Hindus and Muslims, they were considered to be two nations, emergence of Muhammad Ali Jinnah as a close supporter of partition of India, and the Lahore session of the Muslim League, where demand for two nations was also made. So all these kind of developments, they were taking place during this particular period. When we try to see the constitutional developments which took place beginning from 1861 when the Indian Council Act was passed, thereafter in 1892 and another Indian Council Act was passed, 1909 when we have the Morley-Minto reforms, and thereafter the Montague-Chelmsford reforms of 1919 and the Government of India Act of 1935. So what we see then that in all these phases, some or the other kind of demands which were being raised by the Indians, some or the other concessions they were being given by the British, but at the same time they also realized that Indians, they should not be kept together. So in 1909 and in 1909 and 1919, they make some kind of efforts so as to create some kind of separate electorates, especially in 1909, where they provided separate electorates so that some kind of a division could be created amongst the Indians. So that was another important issue of that particular period. Then we come to another issue, which was another important phase. That was the phase of the INA, or the Indian National Army, and INA, which was led by Captain Mohan Singh and Subhash Chandra Bose, and how INA played an important role in that sense, that how it was able to influence a lot of Indians. Thereafter, when India achieves independence, what we see is that the partition of India, it was able to create some kind of a scar among both the communities. How the violence which erupted, so many people died, lakhs of people died, lakhs of people they got displaced in partition, how they became refugees in their own countries, and how the pain of partition could be seen in number of films as well. So that was another important landmark in the Indian history, where two nations, India and Pakistan, they were being created by the British, or the politics which was being followed by the British, and it has been referred to as shameful flight by Stanley Walport. So this shameful flight which led to this kind of a violence could be seen in literature, in cinema as well. So that was one of the defining features of the Indian history. And thereafter we see that how the Constitution of India was enacted in 1949 and being enforced in 1950, and how the Constitution was talking about the various issues. For example, the preamble which talks about India as a secular country, India as a socialist country, how India is a sovereign country, and various kind of important rights and directive principles, universal suffrage, all this which has been given to India or the Indians by the Constitution. With this, I would like to end the discussion. Thank you. A very good afternoon to all the viewers. Today's topic of discussion is retrospect, the period of history in the history of India from 1857 to 1950, and how this period has been studied by not only historians from a particular perspective, but at the same time how the events of this particular period are important to India as a nation as a whole. Because these kind of events which have taken place, for example the national movement, they are quite relevant in the sense that they were able to achieve independence for India. The role of the various national leaders, be it Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose, Jawaharlal Nehru, Abul Kalam Azad, all these people, how they contributed to the Indian independence could also be seen during this particular period. And at the same time, the kind of policies which were being followed by the colonial masters during this particular period could also be seen, that how these policies of colonialism and imperialism, the after effects of colonialism and imperialism on the Indians, that how Indians they became quite poor during this particular period, the kind of exploitation which takes place during this particular period could also be seen. What we also see during this period is the understanding of the exploitative character of the colonial rulers, that how colonial rulers, their nature was such that they tried or wanted to exploit India in every way. They not only exploited India from the economic point of view, where they took a lot of money from India in the form of drain of wealth, not only in the sense that how the incomes of the foreign rulers, they were being sent to Britain, how the raw materials from India, how they were being exported from India to Britain, because of which India lost as a seller, and how they were sending the finished products, machine-made products from Britain to India, and when Indians, they were purchasing these kind of products, they were also losing as buyers as well. So all these kinds of exploitation, not only economic but cultural, political, social, could be seen in this particular period. At the same time, we see the contribution of the national movement as well, that how national movement, it contributed during this particular period. As you can see on the screen as well, how because of these kind of issues, we were able to achieve some kind of independence for India. And when India became independent, it wanted a democratic society, and how a democratic society was achieved because of the role of the leaders, those who were part of the national movement. Not only leaders, but how masses, they were being mobilized in every sphere by these leaders, and not only the masses, but at the same time we will find that the international influences during this particular period, that not only the events which were taking place in India, but at the same time the international influences which created some kind of impact on the Indians, as well as a lot of pressure which was there on Britain, as after the Second World War USA became comparatively a more superior or a powerful country than Britain. So all these issues, they were also interlinked during this particular period as well. And in many of the films also, we find that these nationalist ideals, they were also being shown in some of the films of 1930s and 40s which were made in Hindi, or the silent cinema which was made before 1930. We will find that some of the genres of these films, they were trying to project the nationalist ideals and motives. And on the other hand, when we try to assess the kind of censorship policy which was being followed by the British, then we will realize that it was arbitrary and politically inspired. So British, they also realized that if they will not follow such kind of a policy, then these kind of motives which were associated with the ideas of nationalism, they will be reflected in films. So this also made some kind of contribution. Apart from that, literature was also talking about these kind of ideas, and the literature which was being generated in Bengal or in Gujarat, Maharashtra, which was written in Awadhi as well. So all such kind of literature which was written during this particular period, as well as the songs which were written, which were based on nationalist themes, they were also providing some kind of nationalist fervor to the Indians. At the same time, what we also see is the realization of the economic impact of the colonial rule. Indians, they realized that the way British, they have tried to exploit India from the economic perspective, because of which India has become some sort of a poor country. And when India has become poor, when a lot of material has been taken away from India, then it was hurting India in every sphere, be it in terms of industry or agriculture, that how impoverishment of agriculture had taken place. It had resulted in famines. It has also resulted in the poverty of the masses, no growth of modern industries, deforestation, and the commercial forest policy. So what we see from the economic perspective, all these kind of things, they were taking place in India. And as Indian agriculture had become poor, because large number of Indian peasantry or Indian masses, they were engaged in agriculture, because they did not have any kind of a scope to go into other employment opportunities. More than 90% of the population was dependent on agriculture when India became independent, and it was not able to generate enough produce so that Indians, they could sustain themselves. So from that perspective, when we try to assess the impact of the colonial rule, we find that India had become some sort of a poor country where no industries, they were thriving, agriculture was in a poor state. The forest policy which was being followed by the British during this particular period, we will find that they were trying to appropriate more and more areas into the reserve forest areas. They wanted that the kind of sustenance which the local people had as they were dependent on the forest produce, that was not given to them. And the reserve forest areas were those areas which were being reserved for the British, for the government, in which the natives, they will not have any kind of control over these areas. And traditionally, when we try to see the forest areas, we find that the locals, be it peasants or the tribals, they have always taken produce from the forest areas for their sustenance. And when they were not being allowed to take away any such kind of produce or any kind of resources, then they came into conflict with the British, and numerous peasant revolts and tribal revolts could be seen in India during this particular period because of the policies which were being followed by the British. And all these policies were commercial in nature, because British, they wanted wood to make for the railway construction, for the sleepers which they were making. Sleepers, they were being used under the tracks, and huge quantities of woods, they were being used to make sleepers. And at the same time, we see that wood was also being used to make ships and furniture demands which were there in Britain, and they were manufacturing all these ships so that more and more raw materials could be taken to Britain and more finished products could be brought to India. So all such kind of policies create some kind of a dissonance with the colonial rule, and every section of society became in a way disaffected, or in a way they were not happy with the kind of situation in which they were living under the colonial rule. And on the other hand, when we try to assess this particular period, we find that the national movement had a lot of significance. The emergence of the Congress in 1885 is considered to be the period when the organized kind of a national movement could be seen from 1885 onwards. And all the phases of Congress, be it the moderates or the extremist or the Gandhian phase, in all the three phases, a number of leaders, they got associated with the numerous kind of demands which were there in the society, and how they wanted to get these demands fulfilled from the colonial rule. And at the same time, the movement also brought the true character of the British rule. The true character of the British rule, in the sense that the drain of wealth from India to Britain, where Dadabhai Naoroji propounded this theory, and it was also supported by various other economic thinkers like R.C. Dutt, etc. And they found that huge sums of money from India to Britain was exported during this period, not only in terms of bullion, but in terms of the raw materials which was being sent from India. And at the same time, the kind of establishments which were being managed by the British in Britain, the kind of money which was being utilized for these establishments, it was also paid from the Indian exchequer as well. The so-called paternalism of the Raj, British, they always argued that they were ruling India so that Indians, they become civilized. They showed that they were some sort of a paternal rulers. They were behaving with India in a very fatherly way. But that was not the case. If we try to assess the situation from every perspective, we will find that they were only using the paternalism of the Raj as a camouflage to in a way hoodwink the Indian people. So all such kind of policies in terms of racialism, as they were doing not only in India but also in Africa as well, where they were saying that they were more civilized and the natives, they were barbaric, and it was the duty of the British to civilize them. So the issue of white man's burden, British, they claimed, as Rudyard Kipling has used this term white man's burden, that British used this term and suggested that the white men, they have this burden of civilizing the natives or the blacks. So all these kind of measures, or all these kind of ideological positions, they were being used by the British for their own ends. But when we try to see the significance of the movement, we see that it was able to create some sort of a secular and a democratic society. And at the same time, national movement was also able to mobilize the masses. Large number of people, they were being mobilized because of the national movement. At the same time, when we try to assess this particular period, we find that British had a number of guiding principles, and they were manifest during this particular period. For example, the issue of greed, pragmatism, which they had used in the earlier period, they were clear to the Indians now. The people, those who were trying to understand that particular history, where British, they had tried to use one ruler against another, where they had used their greed, where they were trying to have as much as bribes as possible, as number of governor generals, those who had taken a lot of money as bribes from Indians, how they were being tried in Britain, though they were not being punished, but how they were being tried, as they were derisively called as Nawabs, as the term Nawab was being used in India. So all such kind of things, they were being happening, and at the same time the kind of oppression in which British indulged was also realized during this particular period. And the people, those who were associated with the national movement during this particular period, they realized that unless they will get out of the control of the British, they will not be able to create such kind of a conditions where Indians could thrive. So that was one aspect which was very important from this perspective. And the role of the various national leaders, Mahatma Gandhi, as we have already discussed, the various kind of movements which he led, at the same time the kind of ideology which he practiced, which was based on Satya and Ahimsa. Apart from him, Jawaharlal Nehru, who was very close confidant of Gandhi and who also went to jail numerous times, and the kind of activities with which he was associated in the organization of the Congress. At the same time, the role played by Subhash Chandra Bose, not only in the politics of the Indian National Congress, but at the same time when he went out of India and organized the Indian National Army and tried to give some kind of pride back to the Indians, that they were not in any way subservient to the colonial rule, and they should organize themselves and then violently fight against the colonial masters. And on the other hand, the role of the revolutionaries, be it Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad and others, Ajit Singh, Bhikaji Kama, Shamaji Krishna Verma, etc., V.D. Savarkar, and how all these people not only organized some of the secret societies in India, but at the same time how they went abroad and tried to create some kind of an awareness among others as well, tried to organize the Indians abroad so that they provide some kind of help to the Indians in India. So all this kind of contribution which was made by the leaders in diverse fields was also very central to the national movement. Abul Kalam Azad, who also closely worked with the Congress and later who worked as education minister as well. Then the role of B.R. Ambedkar in terms of the drafting of the constitution was another important milestone in the Indian history, and how he also tried to fight the issue of untouchability is another important aspect of the national movement as well. When we try to assess the movement in the context of the historiography, we find that a number of schools they have tried to see the national movement, and one of the schools is the Cambridge School or the Imperialist School. And the Cambridge School has tried to see the national movement as only some sort of a mock battle, and they argue that there was no basic contradiction between the interest of the Indian people and the British colonialism. They denied that the causative role of this contradiction in the rise of the national movement. The mimic warfare or the mock battle has been referred to the national movement. Absence of colonialism as a socio-economic, political, cultural structure, but only as a foreign rule, and see national movement as power struggle between various sections. So what we see is that some of the schools like Cambridge, they have tried to negate the importance of the national movement as a whole. They just see it as a mock battle. They just see colonialism only as a foreign rule. They deny that it was a structure which was deep rooted in the Indian society in cultural as well as economic and social sense, and they in every way try to in a way lessen the importance of the national movement. On the other hand, we have another school called the nationalist school. They realized the exploitative character of the colonialism, and they felt that the national movement was the result of spread and realization of the idea of nationalism or liberty. They realized that it was a movement of the people. Their weakness was that they underplay or ignored the inner contradictions of the Indian society. So what nationalist school did was that they tried to position the national movement as the foremost movement. They tried to position it as that the idea of nationalism was deeply rooted in the Indians, and they realized that this idea of nationalism was linked to liberty, that Indians, they have sought some kind of independence for India, and for this independence they had this kind of consciousness that they were consciously fighting against the British, and large number of people they came together for this kind of a movement so that they are able to achieve independence for India. But at the same time, the kind of weakness of this movement, of this school, is that they try to underplay the kind of contradictions which are there in the Indian society. Another school is the Marxist school, who sees the primary contradiction between Indian people and colonialism, as well as the process of nation in the making. Their weakness is they were not able to fully integrate their treatment of primary anti-imperialist contradiction and secondary inner contradictions, and tend to counterpose anti-imperialist struggle to class or social struggle. So Marxist position is that they see that India was under the process of nation in the making, but at the same time their weakness that they are not able to integrate the primary anti-imperialist contradiction as secondary inner contradictions. So that was one of the weaknesses. Apart from that, they see it as a structured bourgeoisie movement. They say that they try not to see the open-ended character of the national movement, that a large number of classes, all class character of the national movement was also there. They also tend to equate or conflate national leadership with bourgeois or capitalist class. This has been another weakness of the Marxist. Another school which has tried to see the national movement is the subaltern. Subaltern, they talk about history from below, and when they talk about history from below, they say that the people, those who are considered to be subordinate in nature, those who are subaltern, they had their own consciousness, and these people, generally those who belong to the peasant or the labor class, with their own consciousness, they were participating in the movement. They were not being led by some leaders, rather they were conscious about their role in the national movement. And then they try to break the movement into two. They see the elite kind of movement which was led by the elite section of the society, and on the other hand they say the movement which were led by the peasants and the workers, and these kind of movements they consider them to be the authentic movement which was associated with the national movement. So they try to break the movement into two, and this has been one of the weakness of the subalterns. In that context, that they try to break the movement and try to see the movement from this perspective, that the elite movement was bogus national movement, and on the other hand their national movement was authentic in nature. So this kind of characterization brings some kind of resemblance to the imperialist and the neo-imperialist characterization of the national movement. Apart from this, when we try to assess the national movement, we will find that the national movement was the result of the fundamental contradiction between the interests of the Indian people as well as the British colonialism. So how British colonialism was always in antithesis to the interests of the Indians, how they were not on the same plane any time. But so this idea has been realized by the people, those who are talking about the characterization of the national movement, and the leaders, they evolved as an anti-colonial ideology that on which national movement was based, and they also played a key role by which Indian people, they got formed into a nation. The objective and function of the movement to promote the growing unity of Indians through a common struggle against colonialism. So, if we try to assess the national movement, some of the scholars in this particular field, they have tried to assess the national movement on these basic characteristics, where they argue that they are able to realize the contradictions. At the same time, they were able to propagate an anti-colonial ideology. At the same time, how the role of the people was paramount or important in making India as a nation. So these kind of ideas, they have also been talked about by the various scholars. When apart from this, what we also see during the national movement, that literature, cinema and other kinds of arts, they were also playing an important role in terms of dissemination of information. Various folk theatres, folk forms of theatres like Jatra, Nautanki, Yakshagan, etc. They were also trying to bring those kind of messages which were associated with the national movement to the masses. Number of novels which were written, for example, Untouchable, which was written by Mulk Raj Anand, Kantapura, which was written by Raja Rao. All these novels were also talking about various kind of characters. For example, Gandhi, both the novels, they talk about his ideology and the kind of issues which were relevant to the national movement, because untouchability was an issue which was central to the national movement as well. And various leaders, they were talking about such kind of issues, not only from the public platforms, but they also realized the enormity of the problem, that unless Indians, they come together and unite themselves, they will not be able to achieve independence for India. And when we try to see not only theatre and literature, a number of films, they were also very, very important. When Indian cinema began its journey in 1913 with the arrival of Raja Harishchandra, is considered to be the first feature film, but before it there was a film called Pundalik, which was made in 1912, but we do not have any kind of print. We only have advertisements of this particular film, so it is not available to us. So how Indian cinema began its journey through the various films like mythologicals or socials or stunt films or the popular masala films or the realist films. So the various genres of the films which were being made during this particular period, and how mythological films of this particular period, they were generally seen by the people, those who were watching films. For example, when the mythologicals, they were being made, and where Kans and Krishna, they were being shown, it was generally being shown as Krishna was fighting against some kind of an unjust rule, and British rule was considered to be unjust in nature. Similarly, when Raja Harishchandra was being shown, Raja Harishchandra was being shown as a truth-loving person who was ready to sacrifice not only himself but his entire family at the altar of truth. Similarly, Gandhian ideology was also focusing on Satya and Ahimsa. So these kind of parallels could be drawn by the masses, those who were watching this kind of cinema. And at the same time, women, they were also being allowed to go and watch these kind of cinema which were mythological in nature. And when women, they went out to watch this kind of films, they also became aware about the national movement when newsreels, they were also being shown during the intervals. And in the newsreels, a lot of political news that was also being shown. And when women, they went out to watch these films, they also interacted amongst themselves and became aware about the kind of political activity which was undergoing in India. At the same time, when you see the social films like Padosi, Admi, etc., which were made by V. Shantaram, which were focusing on the issue of Hindu-Muslim unity, caste system, mismatched marriages. There was a film called Duniya Na Mane by V. Shantaram, which was focusing on the issue of mismatched marriages. Apart from that, stunt films were also made. Stunt films in which a lot of action sequences, they were being shown. And these films were patriotic in nature, and they also advocated democracy. And in these stunt films, what you find is that the protagonist is generally semi-clad. Protagonist does not have any means of resources. On the other hand, protagonist was the person who had to get all kinds of riches, but which had been usurped by the antagonist. And the antagonist is shown who is illegitimately having all the kinds of money, wealth and resources which had been taken from the protagonist. So these kind of portrayals, they were also indicating towards a kind of reality in which it was being argued that British were the unjust rulers, they were the illegitimate rulers, those who had taken away all the wealth and all the wealth of Indians. So all such kind of characterizations were pointing towards all these kind of similarities. Apart from that, we also find realist cinema. Some of the films like Dharti Ke Lal and Neecha Nagar, they were made in 1940s, and all these films, they were talking about the realist elements, and realist elements where a lot of poverty, unemployment, etc., that was being shown. So India was also under such kind of a situation under the colonial rule. Agriculture was not prospering, industries were not there, modern industries were absent, because of which such conditions were created. So films were trying to create trying to portray or depict all such kind of images which were also reflecting of the national movement as well. And all these kind of ideas, they were being in a way negated by the British, and at the same time they also used the censorship authority or machinery, and a number of films, they were being censored by the colonial authorities or the British authorities during this particular period, and where all the nationalist symbols or motifs, if they were being shown in the film, they were being excised or cut. So I'd like to end my discussion with this point, that literature, art, all this kind of realm was also associated with the realm of the national politics as well, and they tried to portray in their own manner all these kind of situation in their own way. Thank you so much.